Oh, okay. We are here again for another one. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video. Recently, I've been getting quite a bit of feedback and a lot of people watching my videos on film photography, which is really awesome because that's something I love to do, and I love it when people join in on the discussion. And if you guys have not yet subscribed, make sure to do that down below because I'll be doing tons of film photography, generally just digital photography as well, and also filmmaking stuff like cinematography related subjects and things like that. So if you want to be in on that, definitely subscribe down below. But in particular, with the film photography stuff, I've gotten a lot of people that I think are new to film photography and just really want to know how to expose images properly and what settings I use and stuff like that. So I thought I would do a video on a method that I thought would be really helpful for maybe you beginners out there that are just getting into film photography, or maybe you've been doing film photography for a while and you just haven't been getting as quick with it as you'd like to be. And maybe you don't want to use a meter all the time, and that method is Sunny 16. So basically what Sunny 16 is it's a general rule that will help you easily remember what aperture and shutter speed settings you need to use to get the correct exposure in different lighting conditions. So Sunny 16, when you look it up, basically is a chart, and it ranges anywhere from f16 on sunny days, hence the name Sunny 16, all the way down to like f4 in cloudy, rainy, shady situations. So the first thing you're going to want to do if you're following Sunny 16 and wanting to do it properly is matching your film's ISO to your shutter speed. So as I'm sure you know, there's tons of different films that have different film speeds. Typically they range anywhere from like 100 ISO to 800 ISO, and that's kind of the general purpose films that a lot of people use most commonly. So what you're going to do once you've figured out what film you want to shoot with is you're going to take that ISO value on the film and you're going to match the closest shutter speed value to that film. So let's say you're shooting on a 400 speed film. What you're going to want to do is find the closest shutter speed on your shutter speed dial. With my Canon P, for example, the closest shutter speed is 1/500th of a second. And if you're shooting with a 200 speed film, closest shutter speed is probably going to be 1/250th of a second, 100 speed film, 1/125th of a second, and so on. So once you've got that figured out, now your ISO and your shutter speed are locked off, and you're not going to have to worry about those for your shooting session. So now all you have to do is look at the light that's around you and find the correct aperture value to give you the correct exposure. And that's where this chart comes in. So if we look at it, starting at the top, on a sunny day, 0 clouds in the sky, really bright sun, you're going to want to be shooting at f16. If you've got a few clouds in the sky, it's kind of slightly overcast, you're going to stop it down one more stop to f11. If you've got more clouds, pretty much mostly cloudy outside, maybe a little bit of sun poking through, stop it down again to f8. Heavily overcast situations where you've got no sun poking through the clouds, I would stop it down to f5.6. And then finally f4 for those really rainy days with dark clouds in the sky, or shooting in complete shade, or maybe even sunset. So that part of the chart that I've talked about right there is the base Sunny 16 chart. And I've also got a couple added stops of light for different situations that are a little bit more extreme. So an even brighter situation than complete sun that you might be shooting in is sand or snow. So if you've ever shot in sand and snow, you know that the light can be reflected really easily off of those surfaces, and it just makes it even brighter. So if you stop down to f22, that might compensate for sand and snow a little bit better than f16 would. Also, even more extreme situations than complete shade are shooting indoors and also shooting backlit situations. So like if you're shooting into direct sunlight and you want to shoot people, you know that direct sunlight behind them can make them almost silhouetted. So you stop down to 2.8, that should help correctly expose the people or subject that's backlit that you want to take a picture of. Those are extreme situations though, and that I would only use in an emergency. I would probably have a light meter if you're shooting in those kind of extremes. So when should you use Sunny 16? Well, the first reason that I can see that you would use Sunny 16 is maybe you're shooting with an older camera like this Canon P that I use that does not have a light meter built into the camera, or maybe you have a camera that does have a light meter but you don't have a battery to power the light meter. That would be the first reason to use Sunny 16. So the second situation might be that you're shooting in a quick situation. So the subjects that you're wanting to shoot are moving quickly, light's changing quickly, and you just don't have time to meter all the time. So that's a really good time to bring out Sunny 16 and utilize it. So when should you not use Sunny 16? Well, I can think of a couple places that you wouldn't want to use Sunny 16. The first being like an indoor portrait session. I don't think portrait sessions are really a place where you need to be using Sunny 16 because one, they're typically very planned out, so you can have a light meter and nobody's going to be bugged by the fact that you're metering a lot of the different shots and that you want to calculate it and get it perfect. Also, Sunny 16 is not really meant for shooting indoors. It's basically for outdoor lighting situations to get the most accurate results. So I would definitely have a light meter on you for indoor portrait sessions. So the second situation that I can see that you probably wouldn't want to use Sunny 16, and I don't think you can anyways, is night photography. So with night photography, you're typically using really long shutter speeds with a shutter release cable. Also, you're going to be shooting under artificial light from street lamps or signs or what have you, and the light's going to be a lot more variable than natural light coming from the sun or partly sunny or cloudy conditions. So how do you remember Sunny 16? Well, it does seem a little bit daunting at first when you're wanting to remember a whole chart of aperture values and lighting conditions when you're out there in the field trying to rattle off quick shots. The first easy way to remember Sunny 16 is to just screenshot it. So that's what I did when I first started using Sunny 16, is I just screenshotted a Sunny 16 chart, had it on my photos in my phone, and before I went out and shot, I just kind of looked over the chart really quick and tried to remember it as best I could. And if I ever needed it, I could just refer to it really quickly on my phone and it wouldn't be that big of a hassle. Secondly, you can write down the chart in a notebook or something. So a good reason for that is, one, if you're writing down the chart, it's a lot easier to internalize stuff if you're actually writing it down. Another thing that you can write down for good practice is you can go out and shoot and you can write down the aperture values and the lighting conditions of all of the shots that you take just for practice. And that way you can refer back to them once you develop the film and see what you did wrong, see what you did right, and see what worked for you. So another thing that's going to be kind of hard to get used to with Sunny 16 is telling the difference between the different lighting conditions. So clouds can be very variable. You could have light, hazy clouds, you could have big, thick clouds, dark, rainy clouds, and it's kind of hard to tell in the moment what aperture setting you should be at for that lighting. And a good way to remember what aperture value you should use is by looking at shadows. So if you go around and you look at the aperture values around you and they're really dark and hard-edged, that's probably a completely sunny day that you should be using f16 for. If the shadows are a little bit softer, maybe the edges aren't so sharp, that's probably a situation where you should stop down and use f11. If the shadows are barely visible and they're just kind of blobs, then that's probably a situation where you should be stopped down even further at f8. And then once you get into the situations where the shadows aren't really even visible anymore, that's where you're into the f5.6, f4 territory. So when you first hear about Sunny 16, it might kind of sound like a film photographer's cheat code, that you can just instantly see exactly what settings you need in all different situations, but there are some drawbacks and it isn't perfect, and we're going to go over some of those right now. So for one, lighting conditions can vary infinitely more than full stops of aperture values on a camera's lens, and you might end up in situations that you don't know quite exactly what you need, and you might end up slightly over or slightly underexposing. Also, on most cameras, you can't perfectly match the ISO and the shutter speed. So with most cameras, you're probably going to be a little bit higher with the shutter speed than you need to be to perfectly match the ISO. And also, a lot of people using film cameras are going to be using old film cameras that haven't been CLA'd. This one has not. And the shutter speeds might be a little bit off. So that's one thing that you might also run into some issues with. Another drawback of using Sunny 16 is that you're not going to have a lot of control over your aperture because you've locked off your shutter speed and your ISO, obviously, because you're shooting film. But yeah, if you're using only your aperture to control exposure, then you're not going to have a lot of control creatively over if you can have shallow or deep depth of field, and that can be a disadvantage in some shooting situations. Luckily, these drawbacks aren't too big of a deal because of a couple different factors. So film and color negative film in general typically have really good flexibility when it comes to overexposure. I mean, there's some films that you can overexpose by up to 3 stops and you still get a usable image. So if you are a little bit uncertain about what aperture value you're using, maybe stop it down and overexpose at 1 stop, because it's probably going to look fine, and in some conditions it might even look better. So once you get used to Sunny 16 and you get good at reading light, you can kind of just use Sunny 16 as a starting point when you're out taking photos. So let's say you're out on a sunny day and you're shooting with a 200 speed film. So that would put you at 1/250th of a second shutter speed on your camera. And let's say you want a little bit more shallow depth of field. So if you look at my camera, for instance, this camera has a maximum shutter speed of 1/1000th of a second. So what you can do is you can adjust, you can go up to 1/1000th of a second, and that will allow you to stop down 2 stops with your aperture and get a little bit more shallow depth of field. And that's how you can use Sunny 16 as kind of a starting point. So that's a little bit about Sunny 16, what it is, and how to use it. I hope this video is really helpful for you, especially if you're a beginner in film photography, or maybe you just want to get out there and shoot a little bit faster for street photography or something like that. But yeah, that's about it for this one. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye now.